Joining me now is Kentucky Senator Rand Paul, who's among the senators demanding the NIH and HHS hand over the documents about the coronavirus origin. Senator, thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me. I think Dr. Redfield makes a great point. You know, when you look at COVID-19, it doesn't even seem to infect bats very well. It doesn't affect an intermediate animal. They checked 80,000 animals at the wet markets in Wuhan. None of the animals at the wet market would accept COVID-19 or were positive for it, but it looks like it's most well adapted for humans. So this is worrisome, and yet more evidence that this is, in all likelihood, came from the lab.
Yeah, Senator, I find it stunning. I mean, we're supposed to be reasonable human beings that process evidence, weigh the evidence, and come to a conclusion. That's the very essence of reason. Yet what's odd about this is there's absolutely no evidence, at least that we've seen publicly, that this came from a natural animal origin at all. But there is an entire body of evidence, as I discussed on my show last week, that this may have been generated in a lab. We have this double CGG footprint, kind of a genetic code within the virus that, Senator, we've never seen in nature. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist. We just never seen it. But we've seen a whole lot of it in gain-of-function lab research, Senator. You've been on this from the start.
I think if you look back at the last year and you look at the people who are discounting the theory that it originated in the lab, they were precisely the same scientists who were sending the funding to the lab. So there is a real possibility that they have a conflict of interest, that if it turns out that it comes from the lab and Dr. Fauci and Dr. Daszak were funding the lab, do you think they might have some moral culpability in the origins of this pandemic? So they had a real built-in self-interest not to have it come from the lab. And in fact, when you look at the emails, this Dr. Peter Daszak is encouraging people, and he's talking behind the scenes and then saying, well, maybe we shouldn't sign it because we want to make this look like it's an independent effort to support the idea that it didn't come from the lab. So there's a lot going on here that really is not on the up and up, has a conflict of interest, and moving forward, if we look at this, Dr. Fauci nor Dr. Daszak can be part of the investigation.
Now, Senator, you've been marshaling the effort for truth here from the start. You're now looking to get a hold of these NIH, HHS emails. These are government emails, Senator, as you well know. These aren't private doctors. They're not our dentists. These are public officials paid for by taxpayer dollars. I think in those emails, we could get to the bottom of the motivations behind making this lab leak theory go away. We've already seen some of these emails. What else do you think we could find there?
I suspect we'll find resistance. I don't think that they're going to give us the emails. The emails that we got previously came from an independent party utilizing the Freedom of Information Act. I suspect that we will also have to use the Freedom of Information Act or a congressional subpoena to get these. They're not going to be easily gotten. But I think we have enough information now to know that the people who were sending these emails back and forth, for example, the first day that they catch wind that this might have come from the lab, there's an urgent email from Dr. Fauci to one of his assistants saying, read this paper and get back to me this morning. The paper in question was a paper between Dr. Shi, the bat scientist in Wuhan, and a doctor in North Carolina. And it was one where the doctor in China that wrote the paper concluded at the end, we have had a gain in pathogenesis, which means we have had a gain in function or a gain in the danger of the virus that they developed. She admits it in her paper, and then she lists Dr. Fauci and the NIH as a key funder of her paper, and yet to this day, Dr. Fauci says we have never funded gain-of-function research. So something's amiss here, and he needs to be held accountable for not telling the truth to Congress.
Senator, one last question I'd like to get to here is this. There seems to be a new anti-science attitude from the left that claims to believe in fact and data, the party of science with the dreaded air quotes. They keep telling us things that there's very little evidence to back up. I saw Congressman Massey had objected to a question this week. He had coronavirus, obviously still has some immunity from it. Yet there are some people out there, public health officials and others, claiming that there's evidence that we should get the vaccine if you've had coronavirus in the past. Your comments and thoughts on that and maybe the motivations behind this new anti-science attitude.
This may be the biggest scientific error that Dr. Fauci has made so far and continues to make. He's completely discounting natural immunity, the immunity you get after you've had an infection. All of the scientific studies, and I emphasize that all, Hundreds of studies now show that you do have immunity. But if you discount that and you don't count it, then Dr. Fauci says, oh no, we don't have enough people vaccinated. We're not at herd immunity. Now we have to have mandates on the children, and we must force children of all ages to have the vaccine, even though they don't get sick from COVID very often, and they almost never die from it. He wants to force the vaccine on them because he makes a scientific error and doesn't count natural immunity. About 100 million Americans have had this disease, according to the estimates from the CDC. Over 200 million have been vaccinated. That's virtually our whole population. It's enough people to reach herd immunity. And every day, if you look at the daily statistics, the daily incidence has gone down to nearly nothing. The deaths are going to zero. We are over this. We are at herd immunity. And so I don't think there's any reason to be forcing our children to be vaccinated. But it all comes from Dr. Fauci ignoring the science that you get natural immunity after you've had an infection.
Senator, thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan.